Margie here. Today we're talking about a hidden root cause of osteoporosis that doesn't get nearly enough attention: insulin resistance and blood sugar. Most people don't think about this until they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Yet, this can have a profound effect upon their bones and overall health. So, this was such an outstanding interview that I originally recorded for one of my more natural approaches to osteoporosis and bone health summits that I wanted to share with you here on the podcast. Joining me is Dr. Brian Mowll, who's the founder and medical director of SweetLife Diabetes Health Centers. For more than 20 years, he has helped people optimize their metabolism, improve blood sugar control, reverse type 2 diabetes through a personalized lifestyle approach. He also hosts a podcast and is the best-selling author of The Pro-Fast Diet. So in this episode, you'll learn why insulin resistance is a hidden risk factor for osteoporosis, how to know what tests will tell you if you have insulin resistance, and what is the most effective way to improve blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. So this is full of so much great information. Stay tuned.
Margie, thank you so much. Always love our conversations, and I'm excited to be back here for part 2 of this great event. So thanks for having me.
Oh, well, this is such an important topic, and so many people don't even realize that they can be affected by this. And I love the bright side, though. There's so much that can be done. So everybody listening, these tips are just, really life-changing. So let's just start off with the connection. Why does it matter? Why, if we have insulin resistance or issues with our blood sugar, does this affect our bones? And how does it, what does it do?
Yeah, really great question. And so for people listening to this, obviously, you're here because you're interested in bone health, good bone health, and you may not necessarily think about blood sugar when you think about bone health, but there are a lot of connections, and it's really more about what lies underneath high blood sugar or diabetes, which is a condition called insulin resistance. And if you're not sure if you know what that is, or if you know anybody with it, you probably do, because over half the US population has insulin resistance. There's some studies that show as many as 9 out of 10 US adults have some degree of metabolic dysfunction, which again is driven by this condition, insulin resistance. And basically what it is there's a hormone called insulin. It's a peptide hormone. It's not a steroid hormone, so a little different than like estrogen and our sex hormones. But it's got a very important function in the body. And one of the things it does is helps us to use and store energy. So when we eat food, for example, particularly energy-rich foods like carbohydrates, our pancreas, which is an organ kind of sits behind the stomach, senses that. It's like a sensor. It's sort of like checking the chlorine in a pool. It checks the blood, and if it sees glucose floating around, it releases insulin, and then our body does something with that insulin. So most of it goes into our muscles, and we use it for everything that we do during the day, to walk around and exercise and get up out of a chair and all those things. So we need that glucose as a fuel there. And insulin is what helps drive it into the muscles, or if we have excess, drive it into the fat cells to get stored for later use. So insulin is really important, and it's, from an evolutionary perspective, it's one of the oldest hormones. We find insulin, for example, in almost every animal. And so it's been with us for a long time. And it has many different functions. In fact, every cell in the body has insulin receptors. So insulin acts on every single cell in the body in some way. It does different things, different places. So important hormone. But one of the problems when our bodies are inundated with high energy foods like snacks and processed refined sugar and flour and oils and these hyper palatable foods that we unfortunately eat probably too much of, is we get an over release of insulin, and we become insulin resistant. And when we become insulin resistant, our blood insulin levels rise. So we get high levels of blood insulin, and that then in turn causes a wide variety of problems, including affecting bone health. There are several ways that it does this. One of the simple ways is when you have high levels of insulin in the blood, which again is a compensation for this condition called insulin resistance, you lose important minerals like calcium and magnesium, which I'm sure if you're listening to this, you know how important those are for the bone matrix and bone health. And we uh, release too many of those through the kidneys under the effects of having too much insulin in the blood. So we over release these hormones or these these minerals, and so we don't have enough in the body to do the a lot of the important functions that we need. There are many other ways that high insulin or insulin resistance is associated with bone loss or with osteoporosis. Another key connection is through the hormone estrogen. And we can dive into some of these as we go along, but I just want to kind of give an overview of all the different ways these are connected so people start to realize how important this conversation is for them. But estrogen, of course, is very important for bone health. And, as especially as women go through menopause, sometimes estrogen drops and they can be at higher risk for bone loss. And because the important effect that estrogen has on bone formation and bone protection. Estrogen also is very important for insulin sensitivity. Estrogen sensitizes our cells, like our muscle cells and fat cells, to insulin. So as we lose estrogen, oftentimes we become insulin resistant. The other thing that starts happening is we store fat in different places. So many women notice, for example, as they get older, especially go through menopause, that they start storing fat in different places. And instead of storing fat in their breasts and buttocks and backside and thighs, they'll often start storing fat in their stomach and in their abdominal region. And that is largely due to the effects of estrogen, of low estrogen. And that in turn can drive this insulin resistance syndrome, which can lead to more bone loss. So I know I'm getting a little long here, but I pulled up a few other studies that I just wanted to mention. There was a study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism that found that women with insulin resistance had lower bone density and a higher risk of osteoporosis compared to women without insulin resistance. There was a study in the same journal that showed that men with insulin resistance had lower bone density and a higher risk of osteoporosis compared to men without insulin resistance. So this goes for both sexes. And there was a study in Journal of Diabetes Research that showed some of the connections here between insulin resistance and bone loss. And some of the most important drivers are increased inflammation, which we probably should talk more about, increased oxidative stress, and decreased bone formation, all due to insulin resistance. So this is a strong connection, and there's many other studies. I don't want to go through a dozen of them, but that gives you a good idea of that there is an established connection and some of the mechanisms. So we can dive deeper into those, but um, just one thing I want to sort of put on everybody's radar is when you think about bone loss, it's not all about you know acid alkaline balance or minerals. Those are important factors, but we have to look at what's driving that, some of the underlying root causes. And one of those is metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance.
Yes, and thank you. No, that's the important piece that we're trying to look at all areas in the summit and what may be one of the underlying root causes so that we can deal with this really from the source. But the interesting thing to me about is that a lot of people, said like one day they just go to the doctor and they're like, "Oh, I have diabetes." People don't even think about it until they hear that. They may have prediabetes for 3 years, but no one really makes a big deal about it, and I think that's such a problem because, as you know, this is so preventative, and the minute there's just so many things we can do, and that's what's so exciting. But so why don't you share a little bit about that? And I'd also like you to talk about the values, like how people can have any idea, 'cause I really find so often, unless they're at diabetes, the doctor really may not even say anything, and those are valuable years and so much where we could have really made a big difference, not just wait till, "Oh, yes, you have diabetes," and all of a sudden, then you have to be on a whole regimen. So why don't you talk a little bit about this?
I'm so glad you brought that up because diabetes is diagnosed using lab values. So we can do a hemoglobin A1C test, and if it's 6.5 or higher, that's diagnostic for type 2 diet or for any form of diabetes. If you go in and have a blood test and your fasting blood sugar is over 126, or your blood sugar at any time is over 200, that's diagnostic for diabetes. But insulin resistance is different. If you go in and ask your doctor, do I have insulin resistance? Likely they're going to make a sort of a diagnosis, or they won't even really diagnose it. They might uh, indicate that you have it based on symptoms, based on weight. There's no accepted hard and fast diagnostic criteria for insulin resistance. So if you're not overweight, for example, and your blood sugar is just slightly high, your doctor might say, "No, I don't think so." But they're really not basing that on anything other than your appearance and your blood sugar, which is a very late indicator. So, what I recommend doing is going a little bit deeper and looking at your insulin levels. So you can actually test insulin in the blood. Most doctors don't do it, but you can ask for it or do it. You have, kind of circumvent that and do it yourself. But whatever you need to do, get your insulin tested. And you can test that fasting, or you can test it after a meal or after a glucose challenge, for example, kind of like you would do with an oral glucose tolerance test when you're pregnant. But um, you can check insulin in the blood, and that'll tell you way more about if you have insulin resistance than your blood sugar will. So, what we want to see is fasting. We do want to see normal blood sugar, so you have to do that also. But we also want to see insulin that is not too high. So, a normal insulin test on a blood test of fasting insulin is between 2.5 and about 6. And if it gets too much higher than that, certainly if it gets over 10, that is very high. It's hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood, and that is a sign of insulin resistance, really a cardinal sign of insulin resistance. If you do it after a meal or after a glucose challenge, you really want your insulin to be under 30. If your post-meal insulin gets, in 50, 60, 80, I've seen them over 100. These are really high insulin responses. That means that your body is having to produce massive amounts of insulin to try to correct your blood sugar. And that means you're insulin resistant. So, testing insulin is really important. You can also look at other tests like triglycerides, for example. Your triglycerides from a cardio protective perspective, like a risk perspective, usually the lab will give you a range up to 150. We like to see them under 100. And I've noticed after 25 years in practice that my the healthiest clients that I have from a metabolic health perspective will have a triglyceride level between like 40 and 70, pretty low. And that seems to be more normal. That seems to be more indicative of a healthy liver that is insulin sensitive.
Hey, Margie here. As a physical therapist, I know firsthand how important exercise is for our bones, overall health, and happiness. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion on what exercises are safe and effective for people with osteoporosis. That's why I created this handout that contains a 30-minute video where I explain the concepts so you understand the do's and don'ts when it comes to exercise. And this is important because this way you can go into any class and know what you should be doing and what you should avoid. Because too many people are doing exercises that actually increase their risk of spinal fractures. I also included videos of me demonstrating effective balance, posture, and weight-bearing exercises you can put into your day right away. So all you need to do to access this handout, it's free, is go to tinyurl.com/osteoporosis exercises. So it's tinyurl.com, again, /osteoporosis exercises, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now back to the show.
So those are a couple tests you can do. There are some simple calculations that you can do also. And you can do these by hand, or you can just go online and type in the calculator. So there's a test called HOMA-IR, HOMA-IR. It's the homeostatic model of assessment for insulin resistance. So you just type in that HOMA-IR calculator and you'll get it. You need a fasting insulin and a fasting glucose, and then it'll give you a calculation. And we like to see that below 1.6 or even 1.4 to be optimal. Right around 1 is normal. If it gets over 2, that's a sign again of insulin resistance. There's another calculation called the um, uh, glucose triglyceride index. And that one, like the name implies, utilizes glucose and triglycerides. And it's a logarithmic calculation, so best to use the online calculator. But just look for that glucose triglyceride index, and you put your fasting glucose, your fasting triglycerides, and it'll give you a a number, and we compare that to the normative data. So under 4.5 there is considered normal. 4.5 to 5 is elevated, usually associated with insulin resistance, and over 5 is also associated with fatty liver disease. So these are some good tests, simple things that you can do to get a sense of if you have insulin resistance or not.
And do you find that these typically are not done by
Never done.
they're never
Never
done,
done.
okay.
Yeah, some integrative or functional medicine doctors will do them, but not usually those calculations. Now they're used in research all the time. I mean, if you type in HOMA-IR just into Google, it's going to be mostly research citations that are going to come up because it's used in research all the time. Because the gold standard is called a euglycemic clamp that has to be done in a hospital or research facility, and most researchers aren't going to do that. And the HOMA-IR correlates pretty well with that. So they use this calculation. You can calculate it on yourself and figure out if you have insulin resistance. And what I like more about it than the if or not is you can grade it, right? So, let's say you start where you are right now and your HOMA-IR score is, say, 3 or 4. And then after 3 months of doing some of the things we're about to talk about, I hope, then maybe your HOMA-IR score gets down to like 1.8 or 2, and you're getting better. So it's a good way to sort of grade where you are along the spectrum. And you want to be correcting this, not waiting until your blood sugar is 150 fasting and you already have type 2 diabetes, and you're basically pushing a huge boulder up a hill at that point.
So before we get into what we can do, which I know there's so much, can you just share the levels that you like? Because what I see, I mean, and you said it's so prevalent in our population in terms of insulin resistance. It's not something that just happens to a few people. It's very, very common. But what In terms because oftentimes the doctor really even if it's pre-diabetes, they really won't say anything, "Oh, you're okay, let's just watch it." So tell us the numbers because everybody gets their fasting blood sugar done. So let's just start with also what numbers you like to see on the fasting blood sugar, and I know it's only a glimpse in time, it's only one time, so sometimes, and I've noticed it could be very different days, but in general, what do you like to see with that?
Yeah, sure. So fasting glucose, which you're right, is part of any metabolic panel. There's a basic metabolic panel, a comprehensive metabolic panel that doctors will do. The comprehensive includes liver enzymes, and the basic is some minerals and glucose and kidney tests usually. The comprehensive has all that plus liver enzymes, and they're about the same price. So I always recommend ask for the comprehensive if they're going to do it. Get the liver enzymes. It's good to watch those. And by the way, this is not off topic, but a little bit off your question. Liver enzymes should be uh, below the middle half of the range. So whatever that lab range is, let's say it goes up to 40 on a liver enzyme. You want that to be like around 20 or less, not 39 or 35. So liver enzymes should be pretty low. You really shouldn't have a large amount of liver enzymes. That's where the liver cells and they're present in other cells too, but mostly liver cells are basically, being destroyed and emptying these enzymes into the bloodstream. So if you've got a lot of those, that's a bad sign for your liver. But as far as glucose goes, we want to see the glucose somewhere around 76 to 92. That's the range we use for fasting blood sugar. So there is some variation from person to person. 83 is sort of like the bullseye. A lot of people with diabetes are trying to get their blood sugar to 83, and that's sort of the target, but somewhere in that range. So 76 to 92. Once it gets up into the mid to high 90s or over 100, there really is some sort of problem. So that's a sign of what's called dysglycemia or an imbalance in the blood sugar. If it's fasting, it almost always has to do with the liver. So the liver really controls fasting glucose more than any other organ. And it has much less to do with what you're eating on a daily basis. In other words, if your blood sugar this morning is 98 and tomorrow morning it's 91, it probably didn't have that much to do with what you ate in that span. It has more to do with your overall metabolic health. And there are other factors that affect your insulin sensitivity. We talked about insulin resistance. And those things are things like sleep and stress and exercise. Yes, diet plays a role. And long term, diet plays a huge impact. But from a fasting blood sugar perspective, I'm mentioning this because I see a lot of people, they say, oh my gosh, my blood sugar was 110. I wonder what I ate yesterday. And there might be a connection, but it's more likely it's something else. And most likely, if it stays relatively high all the time, it has to do with the liver. And your liver is likely insulin resistant. Your triglycerides are probably not 50 or 60. They're probably up around 90 or 100 or 120 or something like that. And that's a sign that your liver, again, is at least somewhat insulin resistant. So fasting blood sugar should be 76 to 92. Hemoglobin A1C, if you have it tested, should be between 4.5 and 5.5. Closer to 5 or less is better. And I mentioned insulin, but insulin should be between 2.5 and 6 fasting.
Okay, that's just so incredibly helpful. So, are we ready now to go to what can we do? Because first of all, I just want to tell everyone this book is outstanding. I have the ProFast diet. It's just
Thank you.
you did such a good job, and it's really a complete program. So there is help, and you've been so successful in really wherever you're at. you can stop and you can really reverse type 2 diabetes. But I mean, that's what's so nice about this. You can actually reverse that, but wherever you at, you don't want to get it, you don't want to go beyond. It's so much easier to just stop, make the corrections, and things improve. So that must be so rewarding for you because this is one field where what you're telling people can dramatically change their
Oh, big
values.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the things that drew me to diabetes care is that there is so much you can do to fix it and turn it around. Even, even more advanced cases, I've seen people make absolute incredible, almost miraculous changes and get rid of diabetes completely. So it is not type 1, but type 2. And so it is possible. And even type 1 can be managed to the point where, you can live a extraordinarily healthy, high quality life, and have a normal life expectancy, with a disease that used to be completely devastating and, fatal. And of course, some of that is with the advent or discovery and production and use of insulin, external insulin, but a lot of it has to do with good management of blood sugar too.
No, I couldn't agree more. I have a son who has type 1 diabetes, and he found out in college, and he had gained weight, and they sort of just said, "Oh, just eat and dose yourself," and it didn't work. And then he ended up working with someone and who totally changed his life, a coach, and really figured out what to do. So it really, he's thriving now, but
That's
it
amazing.
was
Yeah.
because of, some certain things that you teach as well that really made a big difference. And that's actually what motivated me to go back to school to learn nutrition and become a
Oh,
health.
that's incredible.
Yeah, because I saw, I was a physical therapist, but I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's the missing piece in osteoporosis. I have to learn what helped him so much." Anyway, but that's another story. But so I just want to start. So before we go into the steps that you're going to share that people can do, can we talk about this liver thing? Because, most people have no idea. Like, okay, my fasting sugar is high. And you're mentioning it's the liver. What steps could people take with their liver?
Yeah. So I think, we want to do everything we can to make the liver healthy. So we talked about the connections between insulin resistance and osteoporosis and bone loss, two of them being inflammation and oxidative stress. And those two things create a lot of problems in the liver. So inflammation blocks insulin signaling in liver cells, and oxidative stress blocks insulin signaling in liver cells, and both lead to insulin resistance. And it becomes sort of a vicious cycle. So, so those two things are really important: is reducing inflammation and trying to reduce and manage oxidative stress. Now, again, there are like these vicious cycles. So oxidative stress can lead to insulin resistance, can lead to high blood sugar, which causes more oxidative stress, and it goes round and round. Same thing with inflammation. But we can still get in there and try to sort of break that cycle. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do. So, we look at the three main drivers for insulin resistance in the liver are chronic inflammation, oxidative stress or toxins, and the third one is what's called lipotoxicity, which is fat accumulation in the liver cells themselves. So this isn't fat on the back of your arms or fat on your thighs or your buttocks. This is fat inside the liver, in the liver cells. And that usually happens somewhat genetically, but oftentimes happens with the wrong diet, with not enough exercise, with high stress and high cortisol levels, and with overconsumption of high energy foods. So once it's there, that's usually how it gets there. Once it's there, uh, we want to try to encourage the liver to burn through that fat as much as possible. And that's what ProFast diet is all about, by the way, because it's not meant to be like a lifelong maintenance diet. It's a strategy to sort of force the body to burn through those deep recesses of fat that it maybe doesn't want to tap into, or that it's not sort of programmed to tap into. And that's a sort of a highly energy restricted diet. If you want to learn more about it, you can check it out. But that's what that's designed to do, is to kind of help burn that fat out of the liver. And that's something that's really important. That can be done through fasting strategies. As long as fasting is healthy for you, we can certainly talk more about that if you want to. Any type of energy restricted diet, like for example, there's fasting mimicking diet. There's other strategies that people can use. Intermittent fasting is one of them, and pro-fast diet is, these are called modified fasts, and those can be helpful. Just reducing carbohydrate in the diet, not for the rest of your life, but at least until you burn through that fat in the liver. A lot of people think fat in the liver, does that come from eating fat? It really doesn't. Dietary fat gets burned or stored in fat cells. It doesn't go to the liver. It's the carbohydrate, particularly the sugar, and most particularly the fructose, that goes to the liver. If you're healthy, metabolically healthy, it'll get burned or stored as glycogen. But if you're not, if you're starting to lose metabolic health, it gets turned into fat. That's what leads to those high triglycerides and that fat accumulation in the liver. So we want to restrict sugar for sure, at least for a while, and fructose in particular, particularly processed refined fructose that is sort of out of its cellular matrix and goes right to the liver, gives us a huge hit. And reduce inflammation. That can be accomplished by healing the gut, by reducing food allergies or sensitivities, or addressing those. There are certain supplements which can be helpful to reduce inflammation, things like curcumin and black seed oil and green tea extract and others. And we want to try to live an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. And then the third thing I mentioned is that oxidative stress. So, we want to try to breathe clean air and, eat good quality food. So we're producing less toxins, and we're intaking less toxins. And then we can protect our liver cells with things like lipoic acid and benfotiamine, which is a fat soluble B1 that is very protective to liver cells. Things like milk thistle or silymarin has been shown to be protective for liver cells. Glutathione, either sublingual or through something like N-acetylcysteine, which drives natural glutathione production, can help boost glutathione, which can protect our liver cells from oxidative stress. So I know there's a lot there. If you want to unpack some of that, or we can kind of move on, but those are probably the most effective ways to support liver health.
No, I think that's great. I just wanted to give people some things that they can start doing in terms of, if that's the case, that they find their resting blood sugar is high. Um, but let's go on, because I think, let's talk about a few of the concepts that in the pro-fast diet that have you've seen really turn the needle. So I don't know if you want to talk about intermittent fasting a
Yeah,
little bit.
so we talk about this concept of health leverage, and I think it's important to think about this. So we want to use the longest levers possible. A lot of my clients are very health conscious people. I'm sure yours are too, Margie, and they come in sort of with this encyclopedic knowledge of health from watching podcasts and summits like this, and they'll be doing all sorts of things like avoiding oxalates or avoiding certain chemicals in their food, eating only grass-fed organic meats, that kind of thing. And they'll be trying, supplements that I've never even heard of sometimes. And there are, all that stuff has its place and it can be beneficial. But what we try to do is kind of narrow down what one thing can you change is going to have the biggest impact on your health now. That's going to move the needle, so to speak, the most in the shortest amount of time. What's the longest lever that we can, push on that's going to really move you? And I think for diabetes and metabolic health, it's body composition. So, we have to think in terms of decrease fat mass, build lean mass or muscle mass. And I know that sounds ultra simple, and it's not as, maybe sexy as some of the other things, but it really is crucial, and it's one of the longest levers we have. So, um, don't overlook that. If you've got that sort of 12 pounds of, extra fat around the belly that, you've been working on for a while, and you're like, I'll never get rid of this. And you've moved on to, wild caught fish and, supplements out of the rainforest, exotic, supplements from the rainforest. You might want to go back and relook at the body composition. And there are ways to, to get rid of that stuff, but it takes work for sure. And you got to kind of lean into it more sometimes. And then don't forget the other side of the equation, which is lean mass. Lean mass is ultra important when it comes to blood sugar regulation, and we lose it as we get older. From a bone health perspective, you know how important it is to have good muscle mass and good, and the exercise that goes, with that to build it. So, you're gonna get so many benefits from doing what it takes to build lean mass, and and it's going to pay huge dividends from a metabolic health perspective. Your muscles are your largest disposer of glucose in the body, something like 70 to 80% of the glucose that you consume and produce is going to get used by your muscles. Now, the brain is a more expensive tissue. It will use more per cell or per cubic centimeter, but you have a lot more muscles than you do brain, and your muscles are going to burn most of the glucose in your body. So the more muscle you can build, and I'm not suggesting you become, a massive bodybuilder, but the more lean mass you can build through the right exercise, the more glucose you're going to dispose of. Your metabolic rate increases, your mitochondrial activity increases, your insulin receptor number and activity increases. So all of that is very beneficial for increasing what we call metabolic flexibility. So body composition is a big one. And again, you know, not by mistake, the ProFast Diet book is all about changing body composition. It's sort of, again, forcing the body to burn through the that stored fat that is sometimes hard to get at in the midsection, in the viscera, and the organs. And then on the other side of the equation, it's building some more lean mass and muscle to improve glucose utilization.
Okay, we could talk forever, but I did have one question with because everybody, worries, especially are they going to get their nutrients, if they change the fasting window. And this has really helped so many people. I know you discuss this in detail in your book, but maybe just share real briefly how about the fasting, where people could start if they wanted to try to, because there are a lot of people who eat right before they go to sleep, and there are people who eat all day. And sometimes just changing that up can make such a big difference.
Yeah, so think about your food logically, for kind of what it's for, and it basically provides two main things: nutrition and energy. And so, based on uh, what our goals are, we want to try to balance our eating strategy, thinking about those two things. So, nutrients are really important. We all need them. And so we always want to eat nutrient dense, nutrient rich foods. Um, One thing that there's some confusion on is which nutrients do we count? And I believe we need to count not only vitamins and minerals, but also fatty acids and amino acids, because those are required essential nutrients. And those are part of our, nutrient matrix. So when you add those into the mix, the most nutrient dense foods are going to be your fibrous vegetables, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, those types, the salad greens, the vegetables that you already know are healthy, and meats, believe it or not. A lot of people don't think about meats as being nutrient dense, but if you look at an egg, it is loaded with nutrition and things that you can't find in many other places, like choline and lecithin, for example. These are important nutrients. Carnitine is found in certain meats. It's important for fat oxidation. So we need these nutrients. And so those are going to be your two most nutrient dense sources. And, you know, uh, animal proteins like wild caught salmon or shrimp, or even like leaner cuts of beef and pork, for example, are very nutrient dense. And compared to the nutrition they have, not very calorie dense, not very energy dense. So those are good choices if you're trying to lean down, build more lean body mass, burn some fat mass. We also have to look at when you're eating because, like Margie, you mentioned, a lot of people eat right before bed, especially if you're eating energy rich foods. So, high fat or high carb foods or both. Um, you want to make sure you have time to burn that energy. Otherwise, it's all going to get stored. So, you can eat some of that earlier in the day, when you can actually utilize it throughout the day. But I don't recommend eating it right before bed. And in fact, I don't recommend eating at all right before bed. Most people don't. But it's just not a good idea because our digestive fire, so to speak, um, we have these circadian rhythms for different hormones and functions of the body, and the digestive system is at its peak between like 1 and 3 p.m. So that's when we should be getting the majority of our food, especially high energy foods. So we'll take those, we'll burn them, and there won't be that much left to store. And then as the day goes on, we need to eat less and less. So we want to be thinking sort of in the evening about more nutrient density, not energy density. So energy, again, think of energy as carbs and fat. So the sugar, the starch in our foods, and the fat in our foods. Nothing wrong with fat, and really nothing wrong with healthy carbs either, if you're not diabetic. But eating them at the wrong time can be a problem or in the wrong combination. So, like something like potato chips, nobody thinks those are healthy, but just as an example, or even something like ice cream, these are high carb and high fat foods, and they're just too energy dense and they don't have enough nutrients. So they don't fill us up. We don't get that nutrient satiety. We don't get, there's hardly any protein in them. So we're not getting protein satiety and we're getting a lot of energy from them. And it makes us kind of want to eat more. So those foods are the most problematic. And I don't think it's probably not a revelation to anybody, but that's probably, some justification on why those are the best foods to eat. So yeah, I want to think nutrient dense, which is going to be mostly your fibers, vegetables, and high quality proteins. And then you want to think about uh, uh, the nutrient dense and then low energy density foods, especially if you're trying to burn fat and build lean body mass.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, this has been so helpful, and you have so many resources in this book, but also on your website. So why don't you share how people can follow you and learn more?
Yeah, so the best way is just to go to the website, which is drmowll.com, drmowll.com. We have a freebie there called the Blood Sugar Manifesto, which you can download. And when you do that, you'll get on our email list. And we don't send all kinds of nonsense. We send really things that are very relevant. But you'll hear about our group challenges that we do, our some of the programs that we offer, and we try to send out a lot of really good information, highlight interviews that either I'm in, like this one, or that I do, like I've interviewed you before for the podcast and summits, and I always love talking to you. And if people want to learn more about that kind of stuff related to metabolic health, go to the website and get on the email list.
Oh, well, I can't thank you enough. And I just love the work you do, and it's helped so many people. So I just encourage everybody that's listening, thank you, first of all, for being here. And if you value this information, please share it with a friend. It helps spread it. But also take what Dr. Mowll said seriously. Look at your values. Start looking at this. I think this is something we sort of have to take into our own hands because oftentimes it's missed. And in that window, so much can be done to just make a real difference in every aspect of your life, really, even including your sleep. I mean, it's amazing when you dial this in how many things improve. So I just love what you do, and this is so important. And it's very important to our bones. And as I always say, happy bones create a happy life. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did and have a better understanding of the importance of managing your blood sugar, how to test for insulin resistance, and what steps you can take to improve this. All the links that Dr. Mowll talked about will be in the show notes. And he also created a special guide for us on the connection between blood sugar and bone health. And so that will be in the show notes. And also, this was a talk that was originally from my More Natural Approaches to Osteoporosis and Bone Health Summit. And there are many, many other talks of this quality in that summit. So if you haven't listened to it, you still can listen for free for 7 days. So that link will also be in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.